Good morning, Chair. Today we return to hearing evidence from the bereaved families of those who died while under the care of trusts in Essex. This morning we will hear from brothers Alexander and Paul Gill. They will be giving evidence about their sister Bethany Lilly, who died on the 16th of January 2019, aged 28. This afternoon we will hear from Jane Stamford. She will be giving evidence about what happened to her mother, Dorothy Reddit, who died sometime between the 15th and the 16th of March 2021, aged 85. Both sessions will include details of the care and treatment they received, or care and treatment received by those who died, and it will also include some detail of how they died. And it's right to say that there may be aspects of today's evidence that are difficult to listen to. For some people it may not be possible to sit through the two sessions, and as with other days, anyone in the inquiry room should feel free to leave at any time. May I also take this opportunity to remind those engaging with the inquiry that emotional support is available for all who require it. Present here again today are emotional support staff from Hestia, an experienced provider of emotional support at these types of hearing. They're currently in this room and they are identified by orange-coloured scarves or lanyards. There is also a private room downstairs where anyone who needs emotional support can talk to Hestia support staff, and if you prefer you can speak to a member of the inquiry team and we'll put you in touch with the emotional support staff wearing purple-coloured lanyards. For those following the hearing online, information about the emotional support that is available can be found on the Lampard Inquiry website at lampardinquiry.org.uk, and the support tab is near the top right-hand corner. And we want everyone engaging with this inquiry in whatever way to feel safe and supported. So, Chair, with that introduction, we have ready to begin Alexander and Paul Gill. And perhaps they can be sworn first.
Sure. Okay. All right. I, Paul Gill, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I, Alexander Gill, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Can I ask you both to tell the inquiry your full names?
Yeah, I'm Paul Nathan Gill.
I'm Alexander Jabez Gill.
Paul, can I start with a brief apology for the fact that you were mistakenly referred to in the opening as Peter. Of course, we do know you're Paul, so our apologies. It's right that you are the older brothers of Bethany Lilly, who you called Beth.
Yep.
And can I ask, are you content for me to refer to her as Beth?
Yes.
Yes.
Beth died on the 16th of January 2019 whilst an inpatient at Thorpe Ward, part of the Basildon mental health unit. And can I just check, how would you both like to be referred to?
Paul is fine.
And Alex.
Thank you. Now, you have prepared a witness statement, which I hope you should have in front of you. It runs to 75 pages, and it's dated the 3rd of June 2025, and it's signed, and it contains a declaration that the facts contained in it are true. Can I start, please, just by dealing with one matter which you raised this morning? You raised a correction to your statement, just a point of accuracy, at paragraph 10.7. So for anyone looking at page numbers, that's page 44. And the first line there refers to the lakes. And you have confirmed that, in fact, that's a mistake. That should read Thorpe Ward. Is that right?
Yes, apologies we didn't catch it sooner.
Yes, that's correct.
No problem at all. Now, with that correction, can I just confirm then that the statement is true to the best of your knowledge and
It
belief?
is, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I should emphasise that the statement will stand as your evidence. It's a very full, it's a very detailed statement. And although I am going to take you through the statement, please rest assured that if I don't mention something or ask about a particular point or don't cover it, it is still there, it is still part of your evidence. And it's also right that you've provided a commemorative and impact statement to the inquiry previously.
Yes.
Now, just dealing with the statement and how you've made it, it's right you've given as full an account as you can. And some of it's based on your own recollections and impressions, is that right?
Yes.
But it also includes recollections and impressions of other family members, in particular your mother, Julia, is that right?
Yep.
And also your sister, Sarah.
Yes.
And it's right that they're both here today at the inquiry.
So Joanne is present.
Sorry, forgive me. But you provided a statement on behalf of the family.
Yes, yes.
And you've also based it on documents. Some of those documents you weren't aware of at the time, but you've been provided subsequently. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And at the outset of your evidence, can I just take the opportunity to summarise and deal with some of the most important aspects in terms of dates and care? Beth died at the age of 28 on Thorpe Ward, whilst an inpatient on the 16th of January 2019. But it's right to say her first admission as an inpatient was some 3 years previously, and that was to the Ardley Ward at the Lakes, and that was January 2016.
Yes.
And she was aged, would have been aged 25 for that first admission.
Yes.
Now, just to summarise, between that first admission in January 2016 and January 2019, she was admitted as an inpatient to various mental health units a total of 11 times. I count from your statement. Does that sound right?
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Sorry, can I just ask, what was her date of birth?
It is the 12th of September 1990.
Thank you, correct.
That is right, yeah.
Yeah, good.
Sorry.
And in the course of those 11 admissions, again, just summarising from your statement, 2 of those were under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act. There were 4 occasions where she was also detained, so Section 2 detained for assessment, and then 4 occasions she was detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act for treatment. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And just to summarise, although Beth was diagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder when first admitted at the Lakes, you also highlight that another key problem for Beth was drug addiction. Is that right?
Yes.
And a key concern that you articulate in your statement is that throughout this period there was an emphasis on simply treating Beth's physical symptoms
Yes.
with a view to discharging her rather than trying to properly understand the underlying issues in her case.
Yes.
And you also wholeheartedly agree in your statement with the findings of the independent investigation and report into Beth's care, and they said this, which you quote in your statement, paragraph 7.5, page 37. Their conclusion was that there was no holistic formulation developed that took into full account Beth's emotional, physical, mental health and social needs. And you go on to quote the report's conclusion that the lack of a robust diagnostic formulation, in our view, was the most probable cause for the failure of all subsequent care and treatment. And am I right, that's a sentiment you very much agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think lots of the evidence we'll be looking at today will very much support that, in our view.
It's also right to say that at the subsequent inquest into Beth's death, the inquest which sat with a jury, they also found, as part of their narrative conclusion, that there was a failure in the diagnostic formulation process, amongst other failings.
Yep.
The other point I want to take you to from the independent report which you cite is page 48, 12.8. And it's the penultimate line at the bottom of the page. It concluded this: none of the interventions over the 3-year period that Beth was under the care of mental health services served to improve her situation. It's incontrovertible that she continued to grow worse. Obviously, the reasons for this were multifactorial. However, the treating team should have realised at a much earlier stage that the approach which kept being rolled out over and over again was ineffective and unable to effect change. And again, just pausing there, is that a conclusion which, again, you wholeheartedly agree?
Yes. Yeah.
So, just by way of introduction, in short, despite all those admissions, 11 in total, and discharges, not only did Beth's mental health not improve, in fact, as we're about to hear, it significantly deteriorated.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to now turn to the first part of your statement. I'm planning to go through the statement as it's structured, so dealing first with the chronology, and I hope to get through that before the mid-morning break, before picking up the second part of the statement where you deal with some themes and also recommendations. So can I start, please, where you deal with background facts? This is part one of your statement, and just dealing with some of Beth's background to start off with. Mm-hmm. As the Chair's noted, Beth was born September 1990, and she was the youngest of 6 siblings, a younger twin, and you are her older brothers, is that right?
That's correct.
Her father was Dr. John Gill, who was a GP,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and her mother, Mrs. Julia Gill. Her parents separated when Beth was 12, and she was diagnosed with ADHD at 16. And you describe her in the statement as a very caring individual, someone who was fiercely loyal to friends.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You also describe her as somebody who adored her nephews and nieces. Am I right? There are a number.
Yes. Yeah. There's quite a number of us, and like the siblings, there's 6 of us in total, and so we've got quite an extended family. And Bethany would always be, involved, and very caring, very loving.
And you describe how she found academic work difficult, and left school at 16 with 5 GCSEs. She started to study to become a nurse in 2014, but unfortunately didn't pass the academic assignments, and she was also diagnosed about the same time with dyslexia. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
She also worked as a healthcare assistant and phlebotomist at your father's surgery from around 2012. Is that right?
Yep.
And is that something she enjoyed?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we mentioned it in the statement that, it comes back to, as you were just mentioning, what she was like with her nieces and nephews. I think that caring part of her personality pervaded everything she did. And so, yeah, she absolutely loved that, the opportunity to work with people, connect with people and help people. So.
Yeah, and as a healthcare assistant, she'd do a lot of work, with kind of elderly patients, and they absolutely loved her. And I was working for Dad at the time as well, at the surgery, and yeah, she was great. She was absolutely super at that role. It was just unfortunate that, to kind of progress further required this kind of academic aspect, I guess, that nursing and things require, doesn't it? So.
And in 2015, she married her childhood sweetheart. Is that right?
Yep.
Although they sadly separated later on during a period of intense mental illness. Turning then in terms of background and Beth's teenage years, and just to summarise, there was some contact with CAMS as a teenager, and the records show an overdose when she was 15. But is it right to say that it wasn't until later, from round about the end of 2015, early 2016, that Beth's mental health problems really began to emerge? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think it was the evidence focused mostly on those 2016 to 2019 years in particular. So yeah, yes, definitely.
And so jumping forward then to 2016, when Beth would have been 25, we see reference in your statement, looking from paragraph 5.4, you set out there some of the initial interactions with mental health services and the circumstances which led to her first admission to Ardley Ward at the Lakes. So just summarising the background there, she had attended at A&E and she was initially, that was as a result of self-harm, is that right?
Yes.
And as you point out there, that was something which continued for quite some time. You described that in 2016, she in fact attended A&E 23 times for acts of self-harm, ranging from overdoses to deliberate self-harm by way of lacerations. And we see she was admitted to Ardley Ward on the Lakes between the 17th of January 2016 and the 3rd of February 2016. And it's here, isn't it, that she received her first formal mental health diagnosis, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And you set out there, and again, worth emphasising, you've seen this subsequently from the records, but is it fair to say perhaps weren't quite as aware at the time of the detail you've put in here about what was in fact diagnosed?
Yeah, I remember her coming home from that specific appointment and sharing it with us, but beyond that we didn't really understand the implication of that and just what it would end up becoming, really. So yeah, it's definitely been the process of looking back through the documents has been what's really helped to shed a light on what was truly going on, I suppose.
And the initial diagnosis recorded was for emotionally unstable personality disorder. That was on the 18th of January 2016. And we see that diagnosis was later accepted in a subsequent assessment in May 2016. But I think as we've touched upon from the independent report, although there was a diagnosis, you and indeed that report are critical as to the extent to which that was explored and that was used to inform her care. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this was, for me, maybe it's a bit early to be saying this, but this for me is like marks the start of this sort of revolving door policy where it was very much a patch up and send her back out kind of approach is how it often felt. So I think, yeah, that lack of the overarching care plan, like you say, I think starts to become really evident.
Did she understand that diagnosis? Did you understand that diagnosis?
I don't think... There's a history of mental health in our families, so we understood there was some similarities with it being a personality disorder specifically. But yeah, so I suppose we had some understanding. Certainly through our one of our family members was with the Haven Project, which is specifically supports people with personality disorders. So I think they did quite a good job of educating families and giving like pamphlets and things to actually outline what a personality disorder looks like. So we were very lucky in that we kind of had some grounding of what it was.
But EPUT itself, it had not explained it.
No, not to us. And yeah, I think we got it fed back from Bethany, and that's my memory of it anyway.
And did you think that Bethany had been given some understanding of this?
I can't. I wouldn't think. I don't think so. It's hard to say. Of course, I wasn't in the appointment, but yeah, it didn't feel like that. Yeah.
Sorry. So that's the initial diagnosis, and she was initially an informal patient, and spent between 17th January, 3rd of February. She was then discharged, and we can see that she then attended the Haven Project, which I think you've just referred to.
Yeah.
And that's an organisation which assists those with EUPD, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's personality disorders generally, but yeah.
And she was also under the care of a team called the Home Treatment Team, so care in the community. The next inpatient admission that you deal with is the 13th of May 2015. Some months later, that followed an overdose. Beth was detained under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act, again admitted to Ardley Ward at the Lakes, and also diagnosed with depression, and she was identified as a high moderate risk of suicide and self-harm. Then 8th of June she was then further detained on Section 3 of the Mental Health Act, so for the purposes of ongoing treatment, and discharged 25th of July 2016, after which you say on a statement she attended A&E a further 5 times due to self-harm. So again, just looking at that and use the words revolving door, we've seen there, even in these early months, a number of admissions and discharges, and a pattern of presentation to A&E. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Definitely, yeah.
August 2016, 28th of August, she was admitted again as an informal patient to Ardley Ward, and on the 21st of October 2016, detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act, then transferred to the Peter Brough unit, and then discharged from the Peter Brough unit on the 12th of December 2016. You understand that during that period, Beth both burnt herself and cut herself, and the notes show 7 visits to A&E in the period between September and October 2016. And as you've referred to a few moments ago, you set out in your statement there, you described there being a pattern where Beth would be admitted, discharged, and then be bounced back multiple times without, it appeared to us, any apparent oversight of her care or clear treatment or care planning.
Yeah, I also, just on that, can I just come back to your question, Chair? I think this part 5.10 kind of perhaps captures even if Bethany understood what her diagnosis was technically because she had that medical knowledge. I think there was no understanding of what the care plan was and what the actions would be that would see her improve.
So that deals with 2016. Then moving on into 2017, and just taking you through the chronology of some of the events in that year. The next event is 24th of January 2017. Beth had an assessment with a consultant psychologist where she disclosed an intention to take her life by overdose, and she also disclosed the existence of a suicide pact with another service user. Now, just pausing on that aspect there, that's something you deal with in a bit more detail later in your statement. And am I right, that was a service user that she knew from the Lakes? Or
I believe so.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
my
Yeah,
understanding,
yeah.
yes. Yeah.
And she had some sessions with that psychologist January to March 2017, but you're not sure how helpful that was. And you describe her being quite flippant about that care, is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I can definitely remember. It's just, yeah, it shouldn't really be chuckling about it, really. But there were times when I'd literally go and visit her on the Lakes, and I'd be like, "How are you?" And she would say, "Oh yeah, I'm good. I tried to kill myself today, but the nurses helped me, so that's good." And she'd just say it with this like super flippant, like really. It was just matter of fact to her that was how her days went, and that was normal. It was routine, and yeah, I think that's what we mean by that sort of flippancy.
Yeah.
Understand. And then the next admission was 20th of March 2017. That was an informal admission to Chelmer Ward in the Derwent Centre following an overdose. She was then discharged 11 days later on the 31st of March. And you comment there that you weren't aware why she was admitted or discharged so quickly. So perhaps another example of that pattern that we've seen of admission and discharge interspersed with self-harm and overdoses. Is that right?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
And again, you describe that as part of, as you put it, the revolving door of admission, discharge and community, which appear to do little to help Beth. One more informal admission in 2017, and then she was managed in the community by the home treatment team and the specialist mental health team from June to December 2017. You described that as a period of relative stability. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then 2018 marks a new period, doesn't it? Because 2018 marks the beginning of a long admission, total of 8 months, to Wardley Ward back at the Lakes between the 22nd of January and the 12th of August.
Yes. Yeah. And so, we're complaining about this quick turnaround, revolving door kind of system, but then we felt in 2018 she was like kept in for an exceptionally long time, and I don't know if it's fair to say that she was kind of quite the same again, since we describe her as institutionalised by that point. This is when she kind of started to put on the weight, didn't she, because of the medication she was on and things, and so like I say, we're just complaining about this revolving door, and then we get like
Yes.
a longer admission, and
But I suppose on that's probably why we feel that overarching care plan was missing, because there was the revolving door approach at one point, and then there was a much longer stay, and at no point did it seem like there was a coherent plan that would see her well.
So nobody explained to you that this might be a planned longer stay, or it just, as your evidence is, that it just appeared to happen without any coherent long-term approach.
I mean, us two personally were never, obviously given information directly by any clinicians or anything. But so all the news that I ever got was through kind of Beth, and it was always to do with when is the next discharge. That's kind of what she would report to us, wouldn't she, when we went to visit her? Oh, discharges. They're going to discharge me in 7 days and things like this, and it was all very odd. And then again, this one, I remember her being in there for that long, and you would go and visit her, and she'd go, no, I don't know when I'm being discharged now. And it was always this kind of fixation on it, and I don't know whether that reflects her or whether that reflects the way the health service were communicating her care plan to her. I'm not entirely sure.
Did she always want to be discharged?
I think most of the time, yes. There's some evidence that will be coming later where you see that change, and she actually does sort of try to advocate for herself, and unsuccessfully so. And I would just come back to your original question about sort of like the family's involvement. And again, as Alex said, like he and I were not directly involved in these kinds of conversations, but our mother was occasionally, again, it seems inconsistently invited to some meetings and not others. But as we'll come on to later in some of the later evidence, there was often like a feeling that she wasn't really welcome. She was kind of like there to sort of tick a box, and she never felt that sort of warmth from those people who were meant to be there to care for Bethany as well. So if there was any family engagement, it was almost like just to tick a box rather than truly engage.
I think we'll be coming back to that. I'm sorry, I interrupted your chronology. Forgive me.
So to summarise, we've gone from a sort of revolving door, short stays of days and weeks with a discharge, and then quickly readmitted to what you describe here, 8 whole months, which is, as you describe, perhaps the opposite end of the spectrum. And you've told us that was, in your view, perhaps detrimental and in itself not helpful. It's also right that during that period of admission, your father raised a number of concerns about the care in that period. Now, you deal with those slightly later in your statement, but it seems it might be helpful just to address those now in the chronology, because they all relate to that period at the lake. So looking further ahead, you address them from paragraph, so page 43 from paragraph 10.1, and you describe there the ward environment.
What was the page number again, sorry?
Sorry, 43. And before we go into that, am I right that the lakes were somewhere you became reasonably familiar with in the course of visits in that period?
Yeah. Of all the wards, it was one I certainly visited the most. So.
Yeah.
And you know, firstly, that there wasn't, in your view, much stimulation in the environment.
No.
You describe very little by way of activities. Another point you described is not being able to smoke without going on leave. Can you just explain a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I find it's an odd one. So the hospital, I guess quite rightly, has a smoking ban. So there's like no smoking immediately outside the buildings or anything like that. But these patients, are kept in a locked facility that has an outdoor area, but they're not allowed to smoke in that outdoor area. So the only way that they're able to go out for a cigarette, which, as you all well know, for someone who's unoccupied and bored all day, we're talking, 20 plus a day, that they probably want to go, whether or not they're given the permission to do that is another point, involves them actually being signed out and actually getting this kind of like informal leave to actually go off site in order just to have a 5-minute cigarette break and go back. You described it once, didn't you? Was it you that was saying like the nurse would kind of come in and be like, smoking break time, and everyone would kind of jump up and kind of go off with this nurse, and you just think that's balmy. They're in this locked facility with an outdoor space, and the bureaucracy to prevent them from being able to partake in that. As a former smoker myself, the stress and the extra anxiety, I guess, that could potentially cause. There you go. I do-
And it's right, you also describe other occasions where she actually had to go on leave in order to smoke.
Yeah.
And that in itself caused problems because it would expose her to
Yes.
various other pressures, which we'll come on to.
Yes.
You also describe Beth being asked what she would do and the response generally being nothing. And by the sounds of things, it sounds as if it was for her quite a boring environment. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, in this paragraph, we describe the news group, which seemed to be the only thing there was in way of an activity, and so it was a bit embarrassing almost to go into the ward because they'd have this schedule of like, this is what's going on today, these are all the groups, and it was always blank. But the one thing that was consistent was this news group, and as I understand it, this is from Bethany's perspective, it was they got the day's newspapers in and chatted about the news for 30 minutes, and that was it. That was the only structure they appeared to have beyond meal times. There were other options like the gym and things, but again, it was always busy. There was always a reason why she couldn't do it. So it's no wonder that it was this complete lack of stimulation on the ward, really, when that was all that was on offer.
And your father was, in fact, so concerned about that period of time, he wrote a letter of complaint, and he highlighted a number of things, but I included the fact that Beth continued to self-harm. Is that right?
Yes.
Also the lack of updates, but he also raised the issue of Beth having had contact with someone who was smuggling drugs onto the ward, and the issues that brought, 'cause it's right, Beth was a drug user, and that also brought a degree of risk to her stay as well, and he complained that Beth was also being encouraged to smuggle drugs onto the ward.
And that obviously then links back to the previous point about these kind of very casual, they're not discharges, what they call
Leave.
Yeah, leave. You know,
yeah.
periods of leave for her to have a cigarette and potentially bring something into the ward with her.
So she's there and she's at Ardley Ward, but as you said, not much to do, lots of periods of leave creating its own risks. Your father identifies some of those, and he also identifies and complains about the fact that, or certainly you refer to the fact that it was this period where Beth entered a suicide pact with another user. Sorry,
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So going back then to the chronology, that was Ardley Ward on the lakes, and Beth was, as we've heard, still self-harming, and there were still admissions to A&E as a result of self-harm in that period. She was also heard to say that she would kill herself once discharged. That was the 12th of August, is that right?
Yes,
Yep,
that's right, yeah.
And then discharged on the 13th of August 2018. And it's right to say that you were concerned by that discharge.
Yeah, and I think it just shows a culture of, I mean, hard to say a culture when everything's so inconsistent, but it does show a bit of a culture of like just not taking that suicide risk seriously. And I think like in our working lives and things, like our experience and our understanding is always like, however serious you think it is, it doesn't matter, you have to take it seriously. And so the fact that she was saying that she would take her own life and then the day later being discharged was really shocking to us.
From your perspective as a family, was there any clear rationale for discharge on that date as opposed to earlier, or not?
Not from what I remember.
No.
And Beth was also discharged into the care of your mother, is that right?
Yes.
And you've also expressed concerns about that because your mother, you describe also as having her own difficulties with mental health, is that right?
Yeah.
Correct.
And you set out in your statement your concern that in view of that, there ought to have been some sort of assessment or steps taken to make sure that was appropriate. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you also describe another aspect of Beth's vulnerability, because you said during her time on Ardley Ward, she was able to take out several payday loans, and that was an additional pressure because it resulted in her being chased for repayment, and that became an added stress and pressure in her life. Is that right?
Yes. Is it worth mentioning? I mean, and I believe the reason for the payday loans was to pay for some of these, the drugs that were being smuggled onto the ward. That's my understanding.
So in summary, that period hasn't stopped her self-harming. There's a additional concern now about finances, and there's also been an ongoing concern about continuing drug use in that period.
Yeah.
And
So looking then at the next period in the chronology, August 2018 through to October 2018, following discharge, she was initially visited by the home treatment team, but you've described Beth finding that care in the community quite unstructured.
Yeah.
We can see that self-harm continued. There was another visit to A&E on the 20th of August, so that's just 8 days after her discharge. Then 29th of August, care was handed over from the home treatment team to the specialist mental health team, but she kept the same care coordinator. And then on the 10th of September 2018, she had a post-discharge appointment following her time on Ardley Ward, and she had that with a psychologist who she'd also seen during her admission. And we see, as you set out there, it was during that appointment that it's recorded that Beth disclosed certain information suggesting that she was subject to serious sexual exploitation.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
14th of September 2018, there was a case management appointment with Open Road. Can you tell us what Open Road is?
Yeah, so it's an addiction clinic in Clacton-on-Sea, and I think our father, who's a local GP, used to occasionally work there.
work with
Work with them.
so
So they would advise people who are living with drug addiction.
And we see that a cocaine misuse plan was put in place. And can I just ask this? We see reference to cocaine here, but elsewhere in your statement. Was that a problem throughout this period between 2016 and 2018?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Alex mentioned, the payday loans coming in and everything, it was really sort of snowballing at this point.
Then 27th September, there was a report of sexual assault by Beth to Essex Police. And then the 5th of October, she attended A&E following an overdose. And on the 15th of October 2018, Beth disclosed that she'd been victim of a financial scam and had lost £100 of her mother's money. And you again comment on that as perhaps being an indicator in your view of her vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the next significant event in this chronology is the very sad and sudden death of your father, Dr. John Gill, on the 28th of October 2018 as a result of a stroke. And you describe there, obviously, that was tragic, but you emphasise that had quite a profound effect on Beth. Can you just tell us a bit more about that, please?
I think what I was just saying, obviously we can see that her mental health really deteriorating significantly in the snowballing of the drug addiction and things. But I think really after Dad died, it kind of felt, like that. That's really where things picked up speed, and we'll see sort of there's some of the evidence later that shows even like the behaviours around attempts to take her own life and self-harming even changed as well. So it definitely exacerbated everything significantly from that point onwards.
And you comment later in the statement, but perhaps worth addressing now, that as far as you're aware of what you've seen of the records as well, despite that event, despite its impact, nothing really seemed to change in terms of the care being provided to Beth. Is that right?
Yeah, there's no evidence that appears to have taken, although like her mentions of Dad and missing him and things are in her notes, it doesn't appear like that ever affected care plans, risk assessments, etc.
Shortly after your father's death, we see that on the 1st of November she called Crisis Line, describing wanting to cut her wrists and wanting to be with him. And she then attended A&E, having taken an overdose. And there was then a medication review on the 2nd of November 2018. And you described changes to her medication. Now, I'm not going to ask you about the detail of the medication at this point because it involves referring to all the different medication, and perhaps easiest to deal with that as it's dealt with by the independent report, which was critical of her medication. But perhaps just to summarise at this point, Beth was on a number of different medications, which included those for psychotic symptoms. But you note from the records, there's actually no note or medical record of her actually having any psychotic symptoms. You also identify there, and we'll come on to this later, the independent report having been critical of Beth being prescribed not just antipsychotics but also mood stabilisers, which were prescribed over a period of time. And you refer to the fact that there are NICE guidelines on EUPD, and they do not agree with or propose medication in that way for that condition. Is that a fair summary at this stage?
Yes,
that's perfect, yeah.
And at the inquest, under questioning, there were clinician, I think one, but the clinician who was questioned about this, near enough dismissed the NICE guideline. Not dismissed that's obviously extreme. I don't mean that at all. But said, said sometimes we don't follow the NICE guidelines. Essentially, words to that effect, and didn't really explain to the coroner. The coroner didn't appear to be very happy with that as an explanation for it.
And just going back to the introduction, one of your criticisms of the medication was, again, the focus on addressing symptoms rather than actually dealing with the underlying treatment and problem. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think from what we can see, as you see if you go through this statement, there's almost like discharge, and this is the updated medication list, and then this happened, and here's the updated medication list. It almost felt like they were just, again, almost like plastering, like bandaging, papering over cracks, and then hoping to just move on with no real overarching strategy or plan.
And we come now to the period between November 2018 up to January 2019, and fair to say that this is a period of lots of admissions, relatively short stays, discharge, further self-harm, further admissions, further discharge, so not dissimilar to the first period we looked at, but as we can see from your statement and what happened, escalating risks and behaviours on Beth's part. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, moving to the next admission, that was 13th of November, or 13th to the 15th of November 2018, Beth was admitted as an informal patient to the Peter Brough unit. That was following an admission to A&E. Whilst she was there as an informal patient, she attempted to self-asphyxiate. She was also reviewed by a consultant psychiatrist, and it was noted that her mental health had deteriorated significantly and that she was displaying near constant suicidal thoughts. And we can see she was, it was noted that she was on level 3 observations. It was noted that she was using cocaine in the community, and it was noted that she wasn't able to keep safe outside of the ward environment. And indeed, from your evidence, that's consistent with your experience as well.
Yeah.
As a result, she was detained under Section 3, and she was then transferred to Thorpe Ward, where she was between the 15th and the 22nd of November. And she described telling clinicians there about having seen her father at rest, finding that very distressing. And she's also reported to have spoken about her cocaine use. She was initially assessed as being high risk in relation to suicide. She was under level 3 observations. And then looking at your paragraph 5.46, we see the 19th of November 2018, her detention under Section 3 was rescinded. And you make the comment there that there was no clear rationale for that decision at the time. And again, is that consistent with your experiences previously?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think this, as you'll see throughout, really from this period through to January, this November to January period, that the mix of sections and informal admissions, it again just really is completely incoherent. Some of the really, and also observation levels as well, sometimes the really high risk behaviours she would demonstrate would result in level 2, level 3 observations, and then you find out that a few hours later she's being left on leave. And similar with sections and informal admissions, I think one would reasonably assume that as the sections get used, that's becoming more severe and there's a reason behind it, but it just very much felt random. Like in many ways we're quite lucky that she did advocate for herself and like admit herself sometimes, really, because it doesn't seem like the sections were really used to help her, I suppose.
And in fact, looking at this decision, you note there in your statement, having reviewed the case notes from the 19th of November and that decision, they don't include any rationale or justification for that decision. And you described there that you were later told, and am I right, was this in the course of the inquest process that you were later given an explanation?
Sorry, an explanation
of the decision to discharge.
Oh, right. Yeah, I suppose explanation would be is an interesting word to use. But yeah, no, I suppose that's where we then found saw the documentation and started to work out what was going on.
And just following on that, my fault, I perhaps wasn't clear. When I say explanation from the treating psychiatrist who explained at the inquest.
I see. Yes.
So
sorry.
You've described there wasn't anything in the notes, but you then heard their explanation. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So in the inquest, that would be part that the coroner, got out of the clinicians. Yeah, because he went through obviously this, as you'll see, the events really ramp up at this stage, and so he really went through this bit in detail.
That explanation included that there was no formal thought disorder, and no active plans by Beth to kill herself. So that was the explanation then given at the inquest, is that right?
Yes.
And it's also right that here it was planned, and here we see the start of what becomes a pattern, the planning a discharge date. And we see this from November through to January. So here on the 19th, it was planned for Beth to be discharged on the 22nd.
Yes. Yeah, and this appears to now be, like kind of formalised. But like we mentioned before, that this fixation on when I'm being discharged, when I'm getting out, was kind of present for a lot of the time. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? Even in the time leading up.
And you, in fact, highlight, so you heard evidence that was said there was no intention by Beth to kill herself, there was no record on the day, but in fact you highlight, if we just move forward to a later record, 5.52, during a later assessment on the Thorpe ward, we can see that there's a record, in fact, of Beth herself explaining her perspective, and I'm just going to read this out because this comes from a clinical record, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It says there, she was not happy when she was told that she was being discharged from Thorpe ward, as she did not feel that she was ready for discharge. She states that she expressed her concerns and her continued suicidal ideation to staff on the ward, but she feels that this was not taken seriously. So, not consistent. We can see the record there from what you were told at the inquest.
Yeah. It might also be worth noting that that's, again, a slight change in behaviour as well, where she is actually starting to advocate for herself and actually perhaps know herself she wasn't safe as well through some of these actions that we'll see.
So start of a period, and we're going to see more of this pattern of Beth being told she's going to be discharged in advance, her not feeling particularly happy with that, and then being discharged relatively quickly in accordance with that plan.
Yes. Or being told, that you've got this discharge date coming up, and then taking other actions, such as these like suicide attempts and or self-harming, potentially.
And we can see that in accordance with the plan made on the 19th, Beth was indeed discharged on the 22nd. And you express your strong concern, I'm looking at your paragraph 5.49, with that decision to discharge her on this occasion. You describe that as an unbelievable action, and you say there, from your perspective, the mental health team showed little understanding or insight into the way Beth was failing to cope with our father's death, and you describe how she was subsequently readmitted very quickly after your father's funeral, and as we're about to hear, in the next 4 months following your father's death and Beth's death, she was admitted as an inpatient to Basildon a further 4 times. So the next admission, 24th of November 2018, that was an admission for just 4 days, 24th to 28th of November. So we can see there that she's in fact been readmitted 2 days after her discharge. 24th of November is the day after your father's funeral. And you describe how Beth seemed to you when you saw her at your father's funeral. So on this day between these admissions, the 23rd of November, and you describe her as zombified, in your words. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. This was I think Alex touched on it briefly earlier, but I think it was far worse at this point. We assume it was medication, but yeah, she was very slow and sluggish. We always knew her as quite a bouncy, like happy-go-lucky kind of person, and she definitely wasn't at this point. her speech was often slurred, and she would sort of sit with her mouth open and things like that. So she just seemed completely, yeah, like, for want of a better phrase, just completely drugged up, I suppose.
And you describe the side effects from medication becoming more pronounced in the months leading up to her death.
Yes.
And you express in your statement your concern at how what you saw by way of what you've just described didn't seem to actually prompt any review or change to Beth's medication.
Yeah, that's right.
So, admitted on the 24th of November, discharged 4 days later this time, second time in a month, on the 28th of November 2018. And in your words, I'm looking at paragraph 5.53, there appeared to be no longitudinal assessment of the impact of our father's death, Beth's vulnerabilities, coping mechanisms, and co-occurring conditions. Can I just be clear about what you mean by co-occurring conditions? Are you also referring there to her cocaine use?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Moving forward then into December 2018, and looking at your paragraph 5.55, Beth was discharged from the dual diagnosis team back into the care of the SMHT, specialist mental health team. And you say you haven't been able to establish any clear reasoning for that. Just pausing there, the dual diagnosis team, is that a team responsible for dealing with those with comorbidities? So, for example, not just EUPD, but also things like addiction.
Yeah, my understanding was the addiction was the main reason why she was under the DDT.
Yes.
And as far as the family was concerned, am I right that dual diagnosis therefore would have been the appropriate team in your view to continue her care?
Definitely.
Yep.
And that remaining the case given, as you've described, her continuing cocaine use?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Then between the 1st and the 7th of December, a number of further worrying incidents, just to summarise. 1st of December, Beth was admitted to A&E after hitting her head on a stone object. On the 3rd of December, she visited a community practice nurse from the home treatment team. She disclosed she'd been sexually assaulted. And the 6th of December, she called the crisis team, disclosing an overdose and having cut her wrists. And that led to 2 days in A&E before she discharged herself. The next admission began on the 10th of December 2018 to the Peterborough unit. That was a result of further self-harm. And right that, from your review, the inpatient records, there are a number of further instances of self-harm in that period. They also record cocaine use, and they also record an instance of ligaturing. Mm-hmm. We then come to the 11th of December, where she was reviewed by a consultant psychiatrist, and that psychiatrist noted, as you've set out, that her mental health had deteriorated since her discharge from Thorpe Ward. Mm-hmm. And does that is that consistent with your experiences at the time?
Yes. I think Thorpe. It's probably not fair to rank them, but I think certainly when she came back from Thorpe Ward, often felt like that was when she was at her worst. I know later on in part 2 we'll talk about like ward environment and things. So
and we see reference there to that psychiatrist also giving a statement later to the inquest in which it was said that staff had been asked to raise safeguarding with the safeguarding team of the trust, but write that as a matter of fact, at no point during Beth's care was a safeguarding referral in fact ever made by the trust. Is that right?
yes, that's our understanding. Yeah.
5.62, 12th of December, there was a further report of Beth disclosing being sexually exploited. And here we can see that, in fact, a safeguarding form was completed, but it was never sent.
Yes, so yes.
And as you set out there, it was never sent to the Trust safeguarding team. It was also never sent to Essex County Council. And you explain the result of that was that there was no monitoring or further action about those types of concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, when we've got a situation where lots of changes happening over a short period of time, I think you'd expect to see that reflected in risk assessments, care plans, etc. And there's just no evidence of that we've seen.
And that issue of sexual exploitation, it's not one that changes or goes away in that period.
Absolutely.
15th of December 2018, Beth left the ward on leave, and it's recorded there that she rang to say she was feeling suicidal. She came back to the ward and staff responded to a call bell to find that Beth had tied a ligature around her neck. And again, she disclosed to staff on that occasion that she was terrified of a man who was exploiting her.
Yes.
17th of December, she returned to the ward from leave, and she was in possession of blades which were removed. And on the 18th of December, she was reviewed by the same psychiatrist who you've described earlier, who saw her on the 11th and had earlier noted the deterioration since leaving Thorpe Ward. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
And then we see here on that date, on the 18th, that psychiatrist decided to discharge Beth. They didn't consider any benefit to detaining her under section. And you note that on the ward review prior to discharge, there's a record of Beth continuing to use cocaine on leave, and that she thought her symptoms were severe. So this would be the third discharge following your father's death.
Yeah.
And a discharge a day after she'd been found with blades in her possession as well. So.
And again, you detail there that the family had very serious concerns about the rationale and decision making given that behaviour and history which we've just been through.
Yes.
The next period, so discharged on the 18th of December, and then 12 days later on the 30th of December, readmitted, and again to the Peter Brough unit for a period between the 30th of December and the 3rd of January, and that was the result of having attended A&E, having been brought in by a friend following threats to drown herself, again not under section but admitted as an informal patient, and she disclosed again having been contacting the man, or contact with the man I should say, who had previously said had been exploiting her. And then 31st of December, the day after her admission, looking at your paragraph 5.68, a plan was made to discharge Beth on the 3rd of January. Is that right?
Yes.
So we'll deal with that decision later, but right to say, as you refer to there, you were concerned about that. That was also a decision which was subject to criticism at the later inquest. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that criticism included there being a lack of community care planning for Beth on her discharge.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's right that then in the period, so the plan is made on the 31st of December to discharge Beth on the 3rd of January, but also important to make clear that there were certainly two very significant events that took place after that plan was made. And before I go into the detail, it's worth establishing that you as a family were not made aware of either of these events at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly not the severity of them either as well. So yeah.
Now, I'm going to in fact ask, I'm going to read the detail of this first event because there is some detail in it, and I'm going to ask that this be put up in screen because this is a record of what was recorded in the case notes about an incident which happened the day after the decision was made or the plan was made to discharge Beth, and this is a record from the 1st of January of 2019. It's page 25, paragraph 5.74. Beth, found on the floor on the side of the bed close to the adjacent wall with tight ligature in place round patient neck at 0030. Beth was visibly purple and had burst blood vessels in her face, ligature cut. Beth sustained minimal scratches to the back of her neck as a result. Beth was placed on enhanced observation, level 2, 460. Describes physical observations obtained. Ambulance called due to laboured breathing. Beth was only responding to loud talking, was not responsive to touch or pain when ambulance team arrived. Oxygen was given with a rebreathing mask, although this proved only slightly effective. Patient was taken to CGH A&E. Once in A&E, Beth was taken to Majors where they requested a neck, head scan and chest x-ray. So that's the first incident on the 1st of January, and that's what's recorded from the notes at the time. Again, you weren't aware of this as a family?
No.
Second incident, now there's some perhaps confusion over the exact date or time of this because of the records, but it's referred to as taking place on the 2nd of January, whichever way it was closely in time after the incident on the 1st of January. And again, I'm going to ask that we put up on screen what's recorded in the notes about that incident. It's page 26, paragraph 5.77. The case notes record as follows. Later on in the shift, the bathroom buzzer was called. On arrival, the door was blocked and could only open a short way. Beth was moved from the door and was found with a ligature in place. Beth was a deep purple shade and her legs were shaking. The ligature was cut off with difficulty as it was very tight and hard to get the cutters in between. Beth had also put an item in her mouth which was visible and easily removed. Observations were taken all within range. It was explained to Beth that she would now be placed on level 3 observations as her safety could not be managed on level 2. So that's the record of the second incident. Again, not one which you as a family were made aware of at the time. Is that right?
That's right.
That's correct.
It's also right to say that there was a record, a clinical record that you describe in your statement, which was made between those two instances, and in fact described Beth as bright and settled. But you express your surprise at that, given those two records I've just read.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Now, you then deal with a thing called the Datix, which is a document or record kept by the Trust of incidents. And it's right that the Datix records in respect of incidents concerning Beth was provided to you during the course of the inquest.
Yes, yeah.
And you were able to see that these two incidents, which I've just read out, were categorised within that Datix, is that right?
Yes.
And the category, or the way in which they were reported or characterised in that Datix reporting system was as, and I'm going to quote the words, not serious incidents.
Yes.
And they were also recorded as low harm for the first incident and no harm for the second incident.
Yeah.
And perhaps unsurprisingly, you express your concern at that classification.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as it's in our 5.76, it's hard to see that anybody who was administered a breathing mask could possibly be regarded as low harm.
And it's also right that the independent investigation report concluded, again perhaps not surprisingly, that those should have been recorded in fact as near misses, and the near miss being a near miss of death or very serious injury.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
And the result of that is you express your broader concern at the accuracy of Datix reporting amongst the Essex Trusts.
Yes. And under again at the inquest, I need to get the two words the right way around. At the inquest, the coroner did get clinicians to, at least one clinician, to admit that was a near miss as well. So yeah, clinicians have confirmed that those cases should have been recorded that way.
It's also just worth drawing attention to our 5.82 as well, is that it does seem like this is not exclusive to our case as
Yes.
well. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, coming back then, if I may, to the discharge decision. So, to recap, that was made on the 31st of December. Mm-hmm. Those two incidents then happen, and as a matter of fact, there was no change to the plan which had been to discharge Beth on the 3rd of January.
Yep.
So as far as you could see, that those incidents didn't have any effect on that plan.
No, it's absolutely baffling to go from
Yeah.
a day after a near miss to being discharged. Yeah, it's hard to see where that could happen, and those near misses could reasonably be taken into consideration about her care.
And she was discharged to your mother.
Mm-hmm.
And you've told us you weren't aware, the family wasn't aware, but just to make absolutely clear, your mother also wasn't made aware of those two incidents when Beth was discharged.
Yeah, that's right.
And you point out in your statement that the justification for Beth's discharge by the psychiatrist who made the decision on the 31st of December was that Beth had no active suicidal intention, psychosis or depression. and you point out that that assessment doesn't appear to take account of those two incidents I've just read.
No, clearly, yeah.
Now, the next stage is a period between the 5th and the 9th of January where Beth continued to live with your mother, and you highlight there some of the challenges around that and difficulties given your own mother's health. And then 5th of January, Beth contacted Crisis Line reporting she was suicidal. 7th of January, she attended an appointment with Open Road regarding substance misuse. And according to the records there, Beth appeared concerned at her discharge, having said that this had been despite, and that being her word, an attempted suicide attempt. Is that right?
Yeah, I think again this is just shows as was seen previously. It's a change in how she was starting to feel about her care, and I mentioned that it feels like she started to feel unsafe, and I think this is a good example of where that was the case.
And then 8th of January, attended at A&E again, and then we come on to the final period of admission, where she was admitted 9th of January to the Peterborough Assessment Unit as an informal patient. And as you've commented, this would be her 4th admission since November.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time. I might try and continue to see if we can deal with this incident now before the break, if I may. I may go slightly over past.
Okay.
So you say they're admitted, placed on level 2 observations, and then 10th of January, she was assessed by a consultant psychiatrist. And it was noted, again, that Beth continued to feel suicidal with constant ruminating thoughts, asking her to kill herself. 11th of January, there was a review and she was deemed a high risk of suicide. And it was also reported that Beth wanted to stay on the ward because she felt safe. Detention under section was considered, but the treating psychiatrist decided against it and she remained an informal patient. And just to be clear, because she was an informal patient, that meant that she could come and go as she wished. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. And actually in previous paragraph 589, it shows that she's self-ligatured for a 3rd time there as well.
So again, no real change
Yeah.
in that level of risk. So 11th of January, no consideration of detention under section. However, there was then a further incident on the 11th of January, which appears to have taken place after this assessment, and you deal with that at 5.94. You express there your concerns and surprise that she was in fact given leave, given the ongoing concerns about sexual exploitation. Mm-hmm. And you describe there that during leave, Beth met a man who she had previously said or had said had been sexually exploiting her, and she returned to the unit at 7:15, visibly upset, no trousers, and reported having been sexually assaulted to police.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
12th of January, then seen again by the same psychiatrist who had seen her on the 11th. And it's right just to summarise that although there was no change to her status as an informal patient, so there wasn't any further assessment under the Mental Health Act, and she wasn't formally detained, it's right that that psychiatrist later accepted that the incident I've just described and Beth returning home or returning back to the unit should have prompted a review under the Mental Health Act.
Yeah.
Yes.
This time, Beth's mother was informed of the reported sexual assault. And then 13th of January, Beth was interviewed by police about events the previous day. 14th of January, she went on leave, this time with a support worker from Reed, but on return, she cut the crook of her arm and she admitted to having concealed a blade on her person. She was then placed on level 3 observations. 15th of January, there was an MDT meeting. Staff were told about the police investigation in respect of Beth's allegations, and she also admitted taking £200 worth of cocaine a week. So that's the immediate run-up to the final event I'm going to deal with in the chronology, and that's Beth's transfer to Thorpe Ward.
Is it okay to just really quickly, just on the paragraph 5.99, that incident with Bethany cutting the crook of her arm was, I think, treated by the coroner certainly as like another very near miss, and also demonstrates that behaviour change. Because again, as I understand it, I don't think she called for help on that occasion either.
So just to be...
Is that's 5.99?
Yes.
Sorry to bring you back, but...
No, and that's in respect of the use of the
Blade.
razor blade.
Yeah.
Yes. So transfer then to Thorpe Ward, that was arranged because of a shortage of beds on the Peter Brough unit, and it was arranged using a company called Delta Medical Services, a private patient transport service. And I'm going to summarise these aspects. It's right to say that there's a very detailed set of findings in the jury's narrative conclusion, and there are also, in respect to this day, admissions by the trust as to two key failings.
Yes.
Beth wasn't accompanied by any paperwork, and she was also not accompanied by any staff from Peter Brough Ward. You express your surprise at that, given that, to your knowledge, there were no shortages of staff on Peter Brough Ward. And your account, you summarise then the evidence heard at the inquest which you attended, and which is again reflected in the conclusion. So I'm just going to go through that, if I may. There was a verbal handover from Peter Brough staff to Delta staff, but no risk issues were reported. It was admitted by EPUT at the inquest that staff should have accompanied Beth, and there should have been a handover. Is that right?
Yes.
Evidence was heard that Thorpe Ward was not given prior notice of the transfer.
Yep.
That meant that they were reliant purely on medical records. However, the two wards were using two different types of patient record software, which meant Thorpe Ward couldn't check or see Beth's recent history.
That's correct.
Even though there was no handover, Beth is recorded as having disclosed on her admission to Thorpe Ward her previous self-harm and ligaturing, as well as previous sexual exploitation, and her plan to kill herself. She was assessed as high risk of suicide and self-harm, and she was initially placed on level 2 observations, that being a reduction from level 3 at Peter Brough, and she was placed on a female dormitory. Your mother reported being able to speak to Beth on the phone and being told that she had already been given a discharge date of the 22nd of January. Is that right?
Yes.
And again, you express a similar concern given her self-harm and the evidence you've given about that. Then 16th of January, she was granted a period of leave in the morning, and it's recorded that around 12:30 p.m., so presumably after her return, her observations were reduced to level 1. You understood that the justification for that from the admitting psychiatrist was on the basis that she had gone on leave without any issues.
Yeah.
And again, that decision is one which you cannot understand and is a significant concern. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just that sort of inconsistency of when leave is allowed, when you're on observation levels, etc. It just seems completely random again.
And the next time in the chronology, at 7:43 in the evening, Beth was found with a white scarf tied around her neck. Attempts to resuscitate her were unsuccessful, and sadly she had died. And you raise the family's concern, again, that she had access to a scarf given a risk of suicide.
Yep.
And it's also right that during the inquest it emerged that the nurse responsible for Beth's final observations, which would have been, or ought to have been sometime around 7, had not made a contemporaneous record and had been called back later after Beth's death to complete that observation.
Yes.
So that deals with the chronology. I think, Chair, that may be an appropriate moment for a break. I'm sorry I've gone a bit beyond 11:30.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. How long would you like us to break for?
Could we resume, please, at 11:50?
11:50. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. I want to now move on to the second part of your statement, where you deal with some of the themes and issues in respect of Beth's care and subsequent investigations. Before I do that, there are just two brief factual matters I want to just highlight in respect of safeguarding. You given evidence about safeguarding and some of the issues that were disclosed by Beth to various health professionals. But it's also right, isn't it, that by way of background, and I take this from 4.8, which is page 5 of your statement, Beth had had a series of abusive and traumatising relationships with older men from a young age. And it's also right that as a result, your father, John, had previously taken out a restraining order against one of those men.
Yes.
And she'd also suffered domestic violence in these relationships.
Yes, that's correct.
So that is the foundation upon which we can look at the subsequent concerns during her admission, which you've given evidence about before the break. One other date to highlight, also relevant to safeguarding, and this is page 23, or paragraph 5.65, on the 17th of December 2018. This was the date where Beth returned to the ward of the Peter Brough unit and had found in possession of blades. You also subsequently discovered during the inquest that also on that day she had contacted police herself to say that she was at risk of being trafficked.
Yes.
Yes.
So, picking up the second part of your statement, the first topic that you deal with is diagnosis. And this is, in fact, the topic or the area which I started with, if you recall, at the beginning of your evidence, where I took you to the relevant part from the independent investigation and report into Beth's care. And you set out there in your statement that in the last 3 years of her life, Beth's mental health significantly deteriorated, despite all of those admissions and discharges that we've seen. And in your words, that was a revolving door of admission and discharge.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
We can see from the chronology that the change or the deterioration after your father's death in October 2018, but you also note there the very serious near misses on the 1st and the 2nd of January on the Peter Brough unit. And as I read out at the beginning, the conclusion of the independent report really was that there was no holistic approach to Beth's care, and it also concluded, as I read out earlier, that the lack of robust diagnostic formulation was the most probable cause for failure of all subsequent care and treatment interventions. You set out, so the diagnosis we know in Beth's case was EUPD, and you identify that even, or despite the issues in respect of her care, there is, so far as you're aware, still no pathway to deal with that condition. And that is an ongoing concern for you and presumably the family.
Yes. Yeah, you'll see that my sister Sarah and mother were actually involved in a working group set up to sort of inform a pathway for patients with diagnoses of BPD, which is outlined in 7.6. But so it's obviously something that's concerned our family for a while, and it's devastating to know that despite that, there doesn't seem to have been anything in place by the time that Bethany was unwell. And
linked to the question of diagnosis are the concerns around Beth's medication. And you set that out 7.7, 7.8. And this is an area which was addressed in the independent report. And that report says this: it would appear that the medical response to Beth's EUPD was managed poorly over a period of years. This method was neither effective nor entirely safe on multiple fronts. Whilst a combination approach, medication with psychological therapy inputs, was indicated, Beth's medication regime appears to have been difficult to justify at times and went against best practice guidance. A significant omission was that detailed symptomology were not identified prior to medication regimens being developed. This means that clinicians did not have a recorded plan with regard to the symptoms they hoped the medication would affect. This indicated that medication reviews might not have been as effective as they needed to be, and at times caused Miss A, or Beth, I should say, to experience significant side effects and oversedation.
Yeah.
You wholeheartedly agree with that conclusion, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier the oversedation element. Where we sort of noticed things like slurred speech, and just not the same Bethany that we sort of knew and grew up with. And just to sort of build on 7.7 and 7.8, if you don't mind, I think it just felt often, when we look through the notes, it feels very reactive, some of these medication reviews. So, I mean, the independent report obviously outlines that there were failures in terms of the medication, but even as someone who has zero medical background, it did seem very much like this happened, so they gave her these drugs, and it's not always clear what the thinking was. And then the independent report did a particularly good job of really highlighting that as well.
And you refer to the emphasis on simply treating Beth's physical symptoms, but what were her physical symptoms?
I can't list all, but I know, for example, at one point she was on, was it blood pressure medication at one point as well? That's a point that we may come to later in terms of how EPUT responded. But yeah, so there were some things like that were thrown in. And yeah, there are points, I think, as we mentioned in our earlier evidence, there was a point when she was taking antipsychotic medication when there was no evidence of any
Psychosis?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And you say there was no effort to try and understand her triggers and protective factors so that she could keep herself safe and so that her mental health would improve. And it's also right, as we'll come on to, that this question of medication also perhaps links to care and treatment planning, because you deal with that under a separate heading, but in fact you say similar things about that in terms of a lack of holistic or coordinated plan.
Approach. Yeah.
Dealing then with assessment, you don't seek to identify a time where Beth wasn't admitted but you think she should have been, but you do, and we've seen some of these instances in the chronology, you've expressed serious concerns about decisions to discharge Beth, and particularly about the lack of consistency in that care and treatment. You used the words, it was all lurching around from crisis management without proper consideration of the particular circumstances, her comorbidities being substance misuse and how it was managed. And you also there identify what we've been through in detail, the shift in approach to discharge date, and, in your view, the pressure that created on Beth.
Yeah.
You also highlight the near misses of the 1st and 2nd of January, where despite the situation changing, most obviously there, the plan stayed the same. And you also agree, again, with the conclusions of the independent report, which says that it's extraordinary to see that during Beth's last few weeks, 2 extremely serious self-ligature events, both of which could have caused her death, no in-depth risk assessment was undertaken or management plan put in place. It would appear that services had developed a very high tolerance threshold when dealing with Beth's behaviours at this time, and that discharge was imminent days before her death. It was entirely predictable that Beth would continue to escalate her behaviours, and it was evident that she was highly distressed and totally out of control. And the report goes on to say that those 2 serious attempts at self-strangulation should have led to an assessment of Beth's status under the Mental Health Act, and write that would have given the option of detaining her rather than her remaining an informal involuntary patient who could come and go and leave as she wished. Is that right?
Exactly, yes.
And it says that both of those incidents should have been subject to a full investigation. A further point you highlight in terms of assessment is the lack of reassessment under the Mental Health Act, particularly after the 11th of January, where Beth had returned distressed and without her trousers. And again, you highlight that as an opportunity to change the status of Beth's admission to better protect her, because obviously under the Mental Health Act she could be detained rather than being present as a voluntary patient. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, it's just to sort of repeat the point really, but it's just very hard to see where you could ever describe assessment as being effective when there were such inconsistencies between inpatient stays, sections, community care referrals. It just felt a bit of a mess. Some illogical discharges, a really reactive sort of crisis management approach rather than a really thought out assessment process. Yeah.
You then deal with inpatient admissions as a topic, and at the outset it was identified there were 11 inpatient admissions between 2016 and 2019, and you summarised those under section, and 2 under section 2, 4 under section 4, and 2 transfers under section 3, spanning a period between May 2016 and 19th of November 2018. And against that backdrop, again, you highlight your concern that there was an overall failure to provide therapeutic long-term care for Beth's serious mental illness. And again, you describe the system as seeming to lurch from one crisis to another without any informed planning.
Yeah, I think again, it's just in terms of like the use of sections of the Mental Health Act as well. It just again seems wildly inconsistent. If you look at the list of admissions, there doesn't seem to be. Again, as I sort of mentioned earlier, you'd reasonably expect there to be some logic between the events that have happened and the course of action taken by those who are supposed to be taking care of her. And actually there just doesn't, we've got a wild escalation of behaviours and yet no escalation of the use of the Mental Health Act at all. And I think even the fact that she wasn't, according to the records that we've seen, it doesn't seem like she was sectioned at all after November 18th as well, which, and we know her health really deteriorated at that point. So it's just, yeah, completely baffling to think that that wasn't seemingly not even considered.
So perhaps just to summarise that concern, we see in your statement reference to certain occasions of stated intent by Beth to kill herself, resulting in section, and we see almost exactly the same intention on other occasions, and that not resulting in section.
Yeah, sometimes it resulting in a stay when she was allowed leave hours after the fact. So yeah.
And it's right to say you also make that same observation. I'm afraid I'm going to repeat the word, but you make that same point about observations. You observe that there are times when she's on level 3 or level 2 or level 1, but the described presentation isn't consistent with the level arrived at. Is that right?
Yeah, again, and also dropping. I mean, we'll come to the transfer later, but there's a dropping there between level 3 observations and level 2 observations, which I think was more a miscommunication. But there are even times when that wasn't an excuse, where she would literally be level 2 observations, which is, as I understand it, 4 observations per hour, and then to be given leave hours later. It just, again, it's completely baffling.
And the next topic you deal with is the ward environment. And I've already asked you about Ardley Ward and the Lakes, and that 8-month stay in, I believe, 2016. And you then also deal from 10.7 with the 2 other units, so Thorpe Ward and then Peter Brough unit. You describe, in respect to Thorpe Ward at 10.7, that it felt unsafe. Can you just explain a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I visited her there a couple of times, and of all the wards, it definitely felt, the least safe. I think a large part of that is probably the fact that it was a mixed sex ward, so there were men and women mingling around, but also the spaces felt very small, very cramped as well, which didn't particularly strike me as particularly safe or welcoming either. And I think, in addition to that, I think even despite our criticism of the lakes, I felt there was more of a staff presence there. I seem to remember lots of times on Thorpe Ward where it just felt like there was no sort of control, and this is purely from my memory, but and I think those sort of things, the fact it was cramped, it was mixed gender, and that there didn't always seem to be very present staff, I think always made it feel a little bit certainly uncomfortable and in my view unsafe.
Did Beth express concerns about the ward environment and whether she felt safe there?
I don't think she said anything specifically about feeling unsafe there herself. I think some of her actions suggest she didn't, but that may have been more to do with her health than the ward environment itself. So I can't say for sure she did. And
you told us that she talked about the lack of activities and that the calendar for activities was blank, apart from the newspaper group. Did she express boredom and...
Yeah, as we mentioned earlier, I mean, you said a second ago, didn't you, that when you'd come in and ask her what she'd been up to, the answer was invariably nothing.
Basically.
So, and I think that was the same across all the wards. I think when we were talking at that point, we were referring to the lakes rather than Thorpe Ward, but I think it was a very similar scenario from my memory.
And you perhaps contrast that with your impressions about the Peter Brough unit, and you say that felt calmer and there was a greater presence of staff, and you say there that your impression was that it was safer. Is that right?
That was my impression when I visited.
The next thing you deal with in your statement is staffing, training and support. And one of the points you identify throughout Beth's care in respect of staffing generally on all wards is the high proportion of agency staff. How did you notice that?
So how do we notice that, in what sense, sorry?
How do you notice that they're agency staff as opposed to permanent staff?
Oh, okay. I mean, the fact that every time you visit, it's somebody else kind of signing you in and things like that. And I think this kind of came through during the under the coroner's questioning and stuff, because you see this kind of list of staff that were being called up, and many of them, like we say, were agency. It was inconsistent. It wasn't always the same people.
And could you also differentiate them from what they're wearing?
Yeah, that's mine. I think they all would wear slightly different uniforms, as mentioned in 11.1,
And you comment on there seeming to be a high turnover. Is that just from your experience of seeing different staff on different days and not seeing the same people?
Yes, yeah.
And you describe it being hard to know who was caring for Beth at any time.
Yeah.
You also describe on the Ardley ward there being an inconsistency with whether or not there be staff outside Beth's room or not, and there being occasions after self-harm where there would be a member of staff and others where there weren't, and you couldn't understand the rationale for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one specific time when I'd gone to visit her, and she was on an I'm not sure what level this was, but it was a level of observation where the nurse had to be like within arm's reach of her at any point. And so again, when you see those sort of observation level's increasing, you're expecting that like there's logic to it and reason to it, but then not long later we've then got those observation levels reducing, and again it doesn't necessarily seem like the behaviour has changed, and yet the observation level has.
And we've dealt with the observations as well, that you suspect, in view of your observations previously about staff, that part of the reason of those issues may be turnover and a high proportion of agency staff, and your concern being that they're not properly trained.
Yeah, not properly trained, and also perhaps not there long enough to really understand like Bethany's long-term care as well.
So I've kind of put that down as a point where I'm saying, like, you know, more consistent, you know, these clear changes in her behaviour that we can see, like that we obviously observed as a family, but that we can evidence with her notes. I mean, you know, you can't expect someone arriving onto a ward to, you know, to necessarily be able to notice that this massive change in behaviours, I guess, and we wonder whether that's contributed to by, you know, a lack of consistent staffing.
And you described there being poor communication from staff on all wards, and I think you're describing that in two ways. One, in terms of them being aware of Beth's risks. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
But also in terms of communicating those risks to you as a family.
Yes. Yeah. The lack of.
And we've seen the worst example of that being perhaps the incidents on the 1st and 2nd of January.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You then deal with care management and plans, and you make this point at the outset, which I'm just going to read out. You say this: one point that our sister Sarah made in the non-statutory inquiry was that despite reading tens of thousands of pages of medical notes in preparation for the inquest, we never once saw a care plan of any kind of overarching plan in place to actually make Beth better.
Yeah.
And that perhaps links to the earlier section to do with holistic care.
Yes.
You didn't see that in the notes, and indeed that was the conclusion.
Absolutely. I think Sarah's sort of vindicated by the independent report as well, which seems to have agreed with that.
And as we've touched on earlier, you couldn't see any change after the 28th of October and your father's death. And at 12.8, we see the findings of the independent investigation and report, because that very much echoes what your sister Sarah has said. And looking at 12.8, it says this: the general impression provided by the clinical documentation in relation to risk assessment and care planning is poor. A very mechanistic and reactive approach appears to have been taken. The independent investigation team found it surprising how ineffective risk assessment and care planning processes had been in keeping Beth safe and well. And as I read earlier, it concluded that it's a fact that none of the interventions over the 3-year period served to improve her situation, and it got worse. And although those reasons were multifactorial, there should have been a realisation earlier that things just weren't working.
Yeah.
It also makes this observation at 12.9. The independent report stated that they found that care plans had been largely cut and paste, with few meaningful objectives and not in sync with the risk assessment and management process.
And while that's in inverted commas in the independent report, under questioning from the coroner, again, clinicians did admit to copying and pasting sections of risk assessment onto discharge and things where where the coroner was saying, the point being that they should have been reassessed at this point, but instead they're copying and pasting from sometimes days or more earlier.
So again, feeding into your concern that whatever happened wasn't being reflected in adjustment or changes
Exactly,
to care.
Can I just, are we going to move on to before we move on to from care management plans, can I just draw a couple of points? I just think there was a paragraph there around like Bethany's involvement in care planning, and I think any suggestion that was the case is hard to see as being accurate. When you think about the admission that she made to Open Road about being discharged despite her suicide attempts as well. So it was evident that she wasn't involved in any sort of discussions around her discharges. And that also just brings me on to community care as well, which, again, findings in the independent report, I'm not sure if they're quoted in our witness statement or not, but Drew, like, there were lots of situations when the care workers would offer odd solutions. So, I mean, they were there to kind of help her integrate back into the community, really. And one such example was that she was offered kickboxing lessons, and that appeared to be it. So although that was probably done by a very well-intentioned person who thought that'd be a nice thing for her to do, it wasn't the kind of rigorous help that she needed in order to be able to sort of move into the community and thrive there, really.
And again, from your description, perhaps not part of any overall plan.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. So moving on to your next topic, treatment. You emphasise here again the concerns about lack of a robust diagnostic formulation, and your concern about Beth being over-medicated, and we've heard your evidence, particularly in respect of how she appeared at your father's funeral. And you detail some of the combinations of medication that Beth was being prescribed. And just to summarise, as you set out at 13.8, she was prescribed a combination of mood stabilisers, antipsychotics, antidepressants, and benzodiazepines. And we've heard, obviously, the conclusions of the independent report, which you agree. But you also raise a concern, particularly in respect of the benzodiazepines. Can you just explain that concern, please? And I think you deal with it at 13.9.
So benzodiazepines, are associated with addiction, and she's being, prescribed, and she has this other diagnosis, obviously, of the cocaine addiction and stuff as well. These drugs have been associated with potentially being abused by her. Sorry, I just want to get my thoughts together while I just kind of read back over this.
Take your time.
So EPUT does not consider this a problem in their factual accuracy response to the independent report, which is an interesting document in itself. They actually stated that she was not considered to be an addict by the staff who cared for her, and yet this is clear, in her medical records that she is was a drug addict at this time. And
had confessed that she had been spending £200 a week on cocaine.
Exactly that. Yeah.
So just to summarise your concern there, it's a situation where Beth is clearly taking cocaine. That's been recorded in a number of records, as the chair's pointed out, even to an extent where she's disclosing spending money on it, taking out loans, and that doesn't seem to in any way feed into the decision making around that, from what you can see.
No, exactly that.
you also make the point, going back to the diagnosis of EUPD and reference you make there to NICE guidelines, that those guidelines make very clear, as you set out, that it is very unusual for EUPD to be a condition suffered in isolation.
Yep.
It's generally one which is also suffered alongside another condition, so frequently other comorbidities. And here, in Beth's case, that was her addiction. And you quote the independent report there at 13.11. The report considering that Beth may also have suffered from antisocial behavioural disorder, depression, and a significant substance misuse problem. And they considered there should have been a more primary focus on her treatment. And you set out there what the report says on that point. It says that there is no evidence of any systematic formulation process that would have helped to understand Beth's comorbidities better, together with a realistic risk assessment and profile. Neither was there the proper use of differential diagnoses in the early stages of Beth's contact with services. And you point out a failure to grapple with diagnosis and that being an underlying issue over the 3-year period. And you highlight the lack of improvement.
Yeah, so we've said there, she came out almost exactly as she came in, and I mean, that's true of almost every... it's harder to list the situations when she was discharged from hospital and you felt she was comfortably better than times when that was not the case, either the same or worse.
Moving on to the next topic you deal with, safety. We've heard during the chronology that we've been through of Beth's care that there were serious concerns raised about sexual exploitation, and in particular, very shortly before her death, we'd heard about the incident on the 11th of January 2019. And you identify here that Beth would continue to be granted leave because she was a voluntary patient and was said to have capacity, and therefore the staff couldn't stop her. And again, you raise the issue that post certainly the 11th of January, those events didn't lead to any reconsideration of whether she actually needed to be detained, which would have allowed decisions to be taken to stop leave. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think any reasonable person would see that she was a vulnerable adult, and with all those safeguarding concerns around her, leave was certainly not something to be given completely unrestricted. And I think this 14.1 in particular highlights an actual meeting amongst staff on the ward where it was established that she had £120 in cash, and obviously again was living with a drug addiction, and yet still, despite all that knowledge, all those safeguarding concerns, it was deemed as an appropriate course of action.
And in particular, in respect of safeguarding forms and the proper process, you set out at 14.10 that EPIT's own internal investigation concluded that there was a failure on the part of staff on the Peter Brough unit to submit relevant safeguarding forms following the disclosure of ongoing exploitation on the 12th of December 2018. And you've also heard about the lack of handover from staff when she moved from Peterborough to Thorpe Ward. So, of course, there was the immediate risk of self-harm and suicide, which wasn't handed over, but also nothing at all about the safeguarding risks which you've set out. You highlight the fact that there were two admissions of failure by EPUT at the inquest, and just to summarise that the full details are in the narrative conclusion, but the two areas were firstly a failure to ensure a full handover between Peterborough Ward and Thorpe Ward on the 15th of January. That was one failure that was admitted. The second failure that was admitted by EPUT at the inquest was that there was a failure to place Beth on the correct observation levels on the 15th and 16th of January 2019. Turning then to leave. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say on that, it just feels important to just come back to that moment and sorry, I realise we'll come on to transfer in a minute, but it's that sort of the lack of communication at handovers, I think was something that was really worth flagging, but I realise that's going to come up in a later theme, so I'm happy to leave that for a moment if that's better for the...
Of course.
Sorry.
Leave and absconsion. I think we've dealt with the question of observations and your what you've said about that, about not being able to understand how and observations not being set consistently in respect of the risks that Beth disclosed or presented with. And then we have leave and absconsion. And again, you make the same point there, that there was an inconsistent approach across Beth's time as an inpatient to leave.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you highlight there the concern that when given leave, it would allow her to return with items which she could use to self-harm. Also illegal substances. And in particular, you understandably raised the concern that it was during these periods of leave that Beth would then come back and disclose having been sexually exploited. And your concern is that didn't seem to factor into the decision making as far as you can see.
Yes.
Yep.
Was there anything else you wanted to add on that issue before I move on to transfer?
I wondered if it was worth just drawing attention for a moment to 15.5, where we talked about that our mother was normally notified if Beth had a period of leave, but staff wouldn't necessarily always wait to make sure she was picked up. And actually, I feel like you said before, you've driven to...
I've done this once as well, yeah. So often, what we've got written down here, staff would... so mum was normally notified if Beth had a period of leave. Staff would not always wait to ensure she had been picked up. She would sometimes be waiting outside, often unsupervised. And that happened for me once when I picked her up to take her up. So shortly after Dad passed away, I picked her up to go to visit the town that Dad had moved to. It's unnecessary detail. But again, she was outside Peterborough unit on her own, and just simply got into the car and kind of said hello, and I drove off, and there was no real handover or anything at that point.
Thank you. Turning then to transfer, this was an area of particular concern, and we have a very detailed finding and admission actually made in respect of that on the 15th of January, and we've been through that in terms of the various different failings on that date, in that they weren't aware of her previous history, weren't aware of her level 3 observations or of the recent self-harm.
She was unaccompanied.
unaccompanied as
Yeah.
well, perhaps most obviously.
Yeah.
And even there is the fact that there was an email sent which wasn't received. It's not known why about her information. In fact, the transfer ought to have included a member of staff, not just out of common sense, but that was indeed trust policy at the time. Is that right?
That's correct.
And there obviously should have been a full handover, including information about Beth's presentation, history and observation levels. Also, Peter Brough Ward should have confirmed to Thorpe Ward that he had received the information before the physical transfer, and again, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the most frustrating is these all seem like very logical and easy fixes, really. Certainly considering that on the day of Bethany's transfer from Peter Brough to Thorpe Ward, of course, Peter Brough, as we mentioned, was had green staffing levels, so obviously staffing levels were not a concern, so that's not that it would have been an excuse anyway, but that couldn't have played into the decision. And I think, I'm sorry if you were going to come on to this, but to go back to the chronology, at 5.106, there was, I believe it was during the inquest, the ward manager admitting to 4 or 5 occasions where this was how the transfer was handled, which is, horrifying
Alarming,
to think that is almost standard practice, you know.
So you in fact heard evidence this wasn't the only time it had happened.
Yeah, I believe it's in 5.106 of our statement.
And the other issue with respect to transfer is, again, the Trust also admitted that there should have been a consultant-to-consultant discussion about Beth's history, the current treatment plan and her ongoing risks. And there should have been a full handover on her arrival. So that perhaps deals with the issue of transfer on the 15th, but you've also described other occasions where you've had concerns about staff not being aware of Beth's level of risk and background. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I also think it's probably worth, just on the subject of transfers generally, like the way in which Bethany was often bounced around from ward to ward, it seems completely reasonable to think that would be very unsettling for her and hard for her to even see that, again, there's a long-term plan for her health if they can't ever make their mind up as to where. I mean, obviously, we understand that there's sort of bed space concerns and things like that, but it's, for someone who was living with what Bethany was, you can imagine how unsettling that would have been to have been not sure where you're going to spend the next night in some ways.
And you then deal with the question of discharge and continuity of care and treatment in the community. And we've been through, in the chronology now, the instances of particular concern about discharge. So the 3rd of January being the most obvious following the 2 near misses. You also highlight discharge on the 18th of December 2018 and the 22nd of November 2018, as well as the 13th of August 2018, Beth being discharged despite having chronic suicidal thoughts, and notes referring to her disclosing to staff an intention to kill herself. And you again detail in your view the fact that the community care didn't appear to be particularly structured and appeared quite random in terms of offers to meet with Beth. Family engagement, again, you've dealt. I think we've dealt with this throughout the chronology, but would it be perhaps fair to say that was a concern in terms of what the family were told about Beth, particularly, most obviously, post 1st and 2nd of January. But I think you described that being an issue on other occasions. And you also describe, in particular, your mother, who was involved directly in some of the discharge plannings, and you say at your 18.1 that even on those occasions where she attended meetings with best treating teams, she rarely spoke or was acknowledged. And you say that she always had the distinct impression that she wasn't wanted there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sort of a point that we raised earlier during the chronology. There was you expect a community care team to sort of. Well, that's not community care team. That's a separate point. But even so, if you're dealing with the family of patients, you expect a warmth there anyway. But when you're also factoring in the fact that mum lives with mental health herself, like it seems especially important to consider that, and I don't think it ever felt like that from her perspective.
Yeah, so two aspects there then, in terms of the actual involvement, not in your view being particularly meaningful, and then on the other side, being discharged to your mum without really thinking about the impact that might have.
Yeah.
As well. Turning then to the next section, concerns about complaints quality, timeliness, openness and transparency. One significant concern that you raise is in respect of the retrospective entry made to the observations on the night of Beth's death on the 15th of January. Those observations were made, or recorded, I should say, by an agency nurse, and you describe in your statement how it became clear during the inquest it was indeed accepted that the record was not contemporaneous. It had been made sometime later. And you felt that when it became clear that the entry was in fact false, you felt that EPUT tried to minimise that, in your view.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it again just speaks to this sort of culture where it was more important for them to just kind of tie up that loose end and make sure that their tracks were covered in that sense, rather than actually recognising that was potentially a failure, that whether the observation happened or not. And I think we as a family accept that it didn't. But I think at any rate, there was obviously a process that wasn't working there. And rather than sort of address that in a meaningful way, it was minimised in their serious investigation report and almost sort of glossed over. In some ways, I feel like we were... it doesn't sound too conspiratorial, but I feel like someone must have slipped up. Otherwise, I wonder whether we ever would have even found out about that. You know, such was their priority on covering their own backs rather than actually addressing the concerns.
And you also highlight, in terms of openness, your concern that records, particularly the Datix records, were disclosed halfway through the inquest, in your words. And we've looked at the Datix, in particular on the 1st and the 2nd of January, and we've seen how those two near misses were classified in those records. And again, that's a serious concern to you as a family.
It certainly is, and also I think that's not the only example of a self-harm incident in the Datix records where it was listed as no harm or low harm as well. So that's a pattern of underreporting or minimisation.
And I'm going to turn now then to the topic of quality.
Is it okay? Just really quick, I just want to quickly draw attention to 19.6 and 19.7, where we just sort of recount the way that our mother was told about Bethany's death.
Yes.
Because we feel that's a really important thing to be heard. So first of all, as I understand it, Mum was trying to contact the ward because she hadn't heard from Bethany for a long time. Was told that they were in a handover meeting and someone would call soon. There was then a follow-up call from a doctor who essentially gave a blow-by-blow account, as we've put it in the statement, of how Bethany was found and the resuscitation attempts, and giving sort of unnecessary medical details. And it actually, to my mum's recollection, she actually had to interrupt the person calling and ask the question, is she dead, to actually find out what had happened. And yeah, again, I think it just shows, like, for us, a real lack of compassion and a lack of understanding of how to deal with bereaved families on the Trust's part.
Yes.
Thank you. Investigation. You were told in January 2019 that there would be an internal investigation by EPUT and a family liaison officer would be appointed. And to slightly summarise this, there were delays in hearing back from EPUT and then in finding a time to be able to meet. And it was then in April 2019 that you heard from NHS England that there was going to be an independent investigation, and that being the investigation we've referred to, which resulted in the report which you've quoted in your statement. In terms of EPUT's own internal investigation, in June 2019 you were told that it had been delayed, you'd get it at the end of July, you didn't receive it, and then you got a draft, and then got a final version in September 2019. And then the next step in the chronology of the reporting was you got the independent investigation report on the 20th of March 2020.
Could I just really quickly come in, because I think this probably links almost to the last section on concerns and complaints, really, but it's certainly worth noting that in 20.11, Sarah actually had, our sister Sarah had to actually chase the serious incident report as well. Again, just coming back to this culture of not really treating families with compassion. And we sort of had expected a delayed report, so that was fine, but you don't expect to have to chase after that. And I think also this is not relevant, but I just want to say that actually I very much feel, and I think the whole family feels, that without Sarah's advocacy for Bethany, we probably would not have got anywhere, which is not relevant evidence, but I just want to say that out loud.
Thank you, that's helpful. So you then received the independent report on the 20th of March 2020, and as we've seen in the course of evidence, you strongly agree with certain aspects of that report. And the next thing that happened in the chronology is there was a response to that independent report on behalf of EPUT. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's correct.
And that response you set out, you deal with this at your paragraph 20.15. The response was provided by Dr. Corrale in a document dated the 24th of January 2020. And you set out there, in summary, EPUT's position in response to some of these points we've heard about from the independent report. Firstly, the response disagreed with the report suggesting that Beth was likely suffering comorbidities, and it raised a point about this being beyond scope. Secondly, it disagreed that Beth had substance abuse problems, and it was suggested that there wasn't evidence that that was the primary issue. And thirdly, it made reference to issues between the two record sharing systems talking to each other.
can I just jump in for 1 second? Because there's just another point that I feel is important here, which is the sort of comment on, and I think I mentioned this earlier on in the chronology, the comment around blood pressure medication.
Yes.
And it just, this factual accuracy response for me captures the sort of tone and the defensiveness of EPA's approach to Bethany's case, where Dr. Corradi chose, instead of, again, engaging with what the report was actually saying and the failings that it was highlighting, found it appropriate to comment that the blood pressure medication was needed in a section of the report which was clearly not focused on that part of the medication that was being called into question as well.
So it's perhaps from your point of view, not seeing the wood for the trees, to put it shortly.
Exactly, and yeah, it felt almost intentional as well. Like it's opting to nitpick instead of actually really engaging with the substance of what the independent report was saying.
And just pulling that together, your concerns at EPUT's response to the independent report, you set those out at 20.17, and again you've referred to them already, but perhaps just to summarise, your concerns at that response were as follows. Firstly, the downplaying of the two near-miss incidents, even in the EPUT serious investigation report, and you make the point that you didn't appreciate the significance of those incidents until you got the independent report. Secondly, the insistence that the medication regime was adequate, and the issue that it wasn't accepted that Beth was an addict. Thirdly, you highlight the defensiveness about diagnosis. And fourthly, you highlight the lack of a formal EUPD pathway.
Can I also just really quickly, because it's a note I made right at the start of this morning, where obviously we've come back a lot to the lack of a coherent diagnostic process, and it's worth bearing in mind that part of EPUT's response was to push back and say that actually looking at a holistic framework of diagnosis, etc., was beyond the scope of the independent report. And then later on, of course, the coroner then looked at that as a vital part of the inquest as well. So I think that just vindicated actually that was the right lens to be looking at it in, and it was, upsetting to say the least to know that EPUT felt that was beyond the scope of the report.
And we'll come on to in a moment, of course, this was all before the inquest into Beth's death, and as we'll see when we get to that section, the failure in diagnosis was indeed a finding made at the inquest amongst other further failings. You deal then with the question of meetings about lessons learnt, and perhaps to summarise that, you certainly felt that there was a meeting. You were given a document which I think you describe as being a print-off of a PowerPoint.
Yeah. I mean, we still have a digital copy of this report, and it is, in fact, a PowerPoint file.
You describe there being a number of spelling errors. You describe there being little detail, and you describe much of the space taken up by a pathway diagram, which I think, according to your statement, you didn't find particularly helpful or enlightening in respect to the issues raised in Beth's case.
Can I just really quickly speak on that as well, which is, from my perspective specifically, at that point when we had this lessons learned meeting, I was actually living in America, and so there was a 5-hour time delay, and I woke up early, I think like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in order to attend this meeting virtually, to then have EPUT representatives present this absolutely shambolic attempt at a document was very frustrating, but then you probably were going to go onto it, so apologies, but to then just be told that the bulk of the meeting was, we're not going to go through this line by line, here you go, essentially, and then the meeting was over in sort of like less than 20 minutes, really. So it felt like they'd kind of put some effort into creating this this document, but actually clearly there wasn't much thought process behind it because they weren't even able to fill an hour-long meeting to talk about it and walk us through it. They just said, we're not going to walk it through line by line.
And they gave us a
the
period of time to respond to it.
That's right, yeah.
You know, we had driven, as a family, we'd all driven all the way up to Whittam just to be sat in a room, presented a piece of paper and told, yeah, off you go, essentially.
Thank you, that's helpful. I'm going to move on now to the section of your statement you deal with the subsequent legal proceedings, so that being the inquest which took place. So that took place after the independent investigation report had been provided to you, also after EPUT's internal investigation had taken place, and also after the meeting you've just described in respect of lessons learned. That inquest took place between February and March 2022, and as I referred to earlier, the inquest was held with a jury and a narrative conclusion was returned. We've dealt with the earlier admissions made by EPUT. Those admissions were twofold: a failure to hand over between Peter Brough and Thorpe Ward on the 15th of January, and also a failure to place Beth on correct observations. So that was what was admitted, and then it's right to say that the remaining parts of the conclusion were not admitted but were subject to findings in the course of the inquest. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
So the jury concluded in their narrative that her death had been contributed to by neglect and referred to certain gross failures which made up that finding, but they also made findings that a number of areas contributed to Beth's death, and just looking at those we can see that they to some extent mirror some of the areas of the investigation report, and also, as you've detailed, some of the areas that weren't admitted by EPUT in their response. So the first, I'm looking at 21.5, the first was there was a finding contributing to Beth's death that there was a failure in the diagnostic formulation process.
Yes.
Secondly, that there was a lack of adequate documentation record keeping by EPUT, and that included inadequate care plan, inadequate discharge summaries, failure to complete risk assessments, incomplete level 1 observation sheets on the 16th of January, inadequate monitoring of leave on the 16th, and also an inability to access all patient record systems. There was also the fact, there was also a further risk assessment and risk plan which weren't undertaken between the 11th of January, that being the date where we've heard about the state Beth came back to the ward in and her death, and they also included the use of the two different record systems, meaning that Beth's history could not be accessed. And in terms of gross failings, those included lack of record keeping, risk assessments, lack of proper handover to Thorpe Ward, and the failure to keep Beth on correct observations. And finally, it's right to say the jury also made a finding that the proposed discharge date for Beth of the 22nd of January was inappropriate, and it was also found that observations weren't carried out properly on the 16th of January, and that being a reference to the observations in the evening where you've told us about the record being completed retrospectively.
Yes.
just to summarise, because I think we've been through this in detail, we've heard about the datix, but as a result of that inquest and that process, you had two main concerns. Firstly, disclosure of documents and information,
Yes.
most seriously the datix, which we've looked at, and it would be fair to say, as you set out in your report, in light of your experience, you don't, or it's fair to say you are sceptical of evidence from EPUT that it takes its response to inquests seriously.
Yeah, I think there's just like a feeling of unpreparedness, really, from most of their witnesses that they called, and it was, just felt pretty devalued as a family as a result.
I'm going to move on now to the final section, unless there's anything else you wanted to add in respect of the inquest.
No, I think I've raised everything I want to. Is anything?
I think so. No. Yep, I've got it. Yes. As in, no, I have nothing more to add. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you're content, I'll carry on now to the end,
Yeah.
if I may. So, drawing all of those points together, you set out in part 3 certain recommendations that you make, and I should make clear that as you set out, these are only provisional because, of course, you haven't heard all the evidence of this public inquiry.
Exactly.
And these are points that you raise now at this stage to assist the chair.
Yes.
Yes.
The first point for recommendation, which you suggest, is you highlight the problem of the lack of robust diagnostic framework for EUPD and an approach which emphasised treating symptoms rather than underlying issues and the underlying cause. And your first point is that you urge the Trust, so EPUT, to take steps to establish a robust pathway of treatment for EUPD. Can I just ask you to explain, what do you mean by that, establish a robust pathway?
I mean, again, we're not medical professionals by any means, so we're not entirely sure what that should look like in practice, but I understand obviously it was obviously a recommendation made strongly by the independent report, and I think for me what it means is, as we've sort of outlined here, rather than this sort of firefighting approach or sort of sticking plaster approach to her care, actually thinking, right, who is Bethany as a person, what are the underlying issues that need to be addressed here, and really planning care for her, that, or in her case, planning care for patients with a UPD that see them as a whole person and realise what the underlying issues are, and adapt the care accordingly.
Yep. And linked to that, your next proposal is 22.3. You highlight the need for good support services, both for sufferers of EUPD, but also, importantly, those caring for them. And you urge there to be sufficient funding to support those types of services.
Yes.
The next recommendation or proposal that you have is at 22.4, and this is where you describe, in your view, a closed culture at the Trust when it came to informing you about changes to Beth's risks while she's an inpatient, so not telling you when there'd been these serious incidents and not passing on information. And you say that we would welcome more open communication between staff and family members and a change to a culture which either downplays change to risk or does not communicate risk at all.
Yep.
Linked to that, but significantly in view of the evidence you've given about the 1st and 2nd of January incidents, you say, in your view, there should be mandatory reporting of all near misses and the family must be informed in every instance where there's a near miss. And clearly from your evidence, had that happened in Beth's case, that would have made a difference to you. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also ties in with one of the later recommendations as well, about that we'll need to have confidence in the reporting of these incidents as well, because at the moment, if the 2 near misses were regarded as low harm or no harm, then by that recommendation, if that were accurate, we wouldn't have heard about them at any rate. So I think it kind of goes side by side with that one that comes later.
Your next proposal is for there to be greater involvement of the family in discharge and care planning, and we've heard the basis for that. We've heard the difficulties with discharge planning and also involvement of your mother in that process and the issues which you've set out surrounding that. And you say where there's a requirement to involve families, there must be more than lip service.
Absolutely.
And also you highlight the need for there to be adequate support to the carer to whom discharge is being made, and the need, in your view, for there to be a safeguarding assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's in this one we're sort of thinking as well about everyone that's involved in the care of Bethany as well. So actually, like, where a vulnerable person is being sent into the care of someone who's also could be considered vulnerable in some ways, that should be taken on board, and there should be a real rigorous and thorough plan in place as to how both those are going to be managed.
Your next proposal is in respect of transfer, and you propose, in addition to that, there needing to be training to ensure a full handover takes place. You propose there should be minimum standards as to what any handover should involve, and we've heard just how badly wrong that went in Beth's case.
Yep.
Where there wasn't any.
And again, it comes back to something I said earlier, like that doesn't seem like a hard thing to fix, and in fact the Trust's policies at the moment say that a member of staff should go there, so there was obviously a failing there, but even so, we understand there was an email sent, but no follow-up. There was no one seemed desperate to find out if that information had been received and understood. And if that takes a phone call, then it's hard to see why that didn't happen, and why it certainly shouldn't happen in all future cases.
Yeah. The next point you recommend is action, to summarise really, action to ensure the accuracy of DATIC's reporting so that families can have confidence in that. Obviously that arises in particular from the 1st and 2nd of January, but also, as you've detailed earlier, you believe there are wider concerns around that, and you believe action needs to be taken to ensure that there is confidence that it accurately records what has happened.
Yes.
Next, you deal with culture, and I'm just going to read this aspect of your statement. You say this at 22.9: the defensive culture which we experienced after the death of our sister is something no family should have to endure after facing a bereavement. From the standoffish and defensive response of the Trust to the independent report, to the defensive attitude of witnesses at the inquest, to the late disclosure halfway through the inquest process of key documents. It felt like our search for answers was being frustrated at every turn. It fell to us, for example, to chase for updates about the serious investigation report, and it took complaining to the coroner to even get a first phone call from our family liaison officer. The Trust must learn to deal with bereaved families with compassion and openness. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, in honesty, I think there's so many examples of where we've seen that, and it's just feel very devalued when you're not taken seriously in a situation like this. And again, just to come back and say that, you know, without Sarah, we perhaps wouldn't even be here now, having the opportunity to share this, and it shouldn't fall on the families to chase. And when families are desperate for answers, the immediate response should not be one of defensiveness and trying to shut down and frustrate that process.
Yeah.
Can I just be clear, was the family liaison officer, the inquest, the coroner's family liaison officer?
I'm not sure. I didn't think so. I think that was the trust's family liaison officer, as I remember it.
There was a family liaison officer mentioned earlier, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll
Yeah,
chase
come
that
back
down.
to- yeah, so-
We'll chase that down.
Thank you, Chair. Your next proposal is that there should be a national oversight mechanism which is independent and can properly scrutinise the implementation of recommendations.
Yeah, we felt that the inquest's opening statement was really, set out that case very clearly, and we support it.
And finally, you deal with information, perhaps a simple proposal to what is no doubt not a straightforward problem, but you identify the need for all staff to be able to access all information about any patient. And that's obvious given the evidence you've given about Beth and her circumstances.
Yeah, and I mean, in the response to the independent report letter, they mentioned about these systems that are not talking to each other, and it's I feel that should that not be a legal requirement, that if you have computer systems, okay, you can have different computer systems, but within the same trust, important information should be able to be disseminated between them. I don't think that's unreasonable.
So that takes us to the end of the section dealing with recommendations. Chair, do you have any questions at this point?
No, I don't.
Well, thank you very much for your evidence. We're going to, unless there's anything further you'd like to say now, we're going to take a break in which we will consider whether there are any further questions we need to ask. There may not be. So with that in mind, is there anything else you'd like to add to any aspect of your evidence today?
No, I don't think so. We've covered everything very thoroughly.
Can I take, therefore, this opportunity to thank you both very much indeed for your evidence. It's most helpful to us, so thank you.
Thank you for hearing it.
Thank you, Chair. Before we rise, this is also the time when it's proposed we put up a picture of Beth, so perhaps we could have that on screen. Thank you. So those are all the questions I have. As I say, we will consider whether there are any more. And Chair, perhaps we could return in 45 minutes after lunch. Thank you.